After 15 years as the beloved daughter of respected history professor Frank Wilson, Muslim American Amira Malik suddenly finds herself erased from her father's will upon his death in a small Ohio town where prejudice runs deeper than blood. Now armed with only her memories and a mysterious key, Amira must uncover hidden truths and confront those who would deny her identity before her father's final message and her rightful inheritance are lost forever. Chapter 1. They called her daughter for 15 years, but at the funeral, Frank Wilson's will claimed she didn't exist. What the Wilsons hadn't counted on was the evidence Amira had kept all along. Amira Malik couldn't even make it through the church's entrance before feeling the first sting of rejection. It wasn't anything said aloud. It was the pointed silence that hung in the air when she entered, her hijab drawing every eye in the room. People looked, then quickly averted their gaze. Some nodded politely, others pretended not to see her at all. She adjusted her navy blue coat and walked toward the front pew where her adoptive father's casket lay, surrounded by white lilies and a framed photo of Frank Wilson, the respected history professor known in Marion, Ohio, as the kind man with the patient smile. Amira hadn't seen some of these people in years, maybe longer. But Frank had raised her as his daughter since she was 8 years old, after her parents died in a car accident back in Michigan. That meant something. At least it used to. She sat down next to Frank's sister Margaret, who offered a tight smile and a single word. Hello. No hug, no warmth. Amira stared ahead, her chest tight with grief. Not just from the loss, but from this feeling she couldn't shake. Like she didn't belong here. Like she was being tolerated rather than welcomed. As if her faith made her less of a daughter to the man they'd come to mourn. The service began, the pastor speaking gently about Frank's generosity and kindness. Amira held herself together until they played his favorite Elvis song. That broke her. She let a few tears fall, keeping her face down. After the service, James Bartlett approached her father's longtime attorney who had handled Frank's legal affairs for decades. Amira, he said softly, I need to speak with you privately. It's about the will. The phrase alone made her stomach drop. Chapter 2. She followed James down a narrow hallway, into a small office away from the murmur of voices and clinking glasses. He closed the door softly and motioned for her to sit. I wanted to speak to you before the formal reading, he said, his voice measured. There's no easy way to say this. Your name doesn't appear in Frank's will. Amira stared at him, blinking slowly as if her brain couldn't process the words. What? That makes no sense. It appears, James continued, not quite meeting her eyes, that legally speaking, your adoption was never finalized. I've checked everything. There's no court record, no completed paperwork. The air seemed to evaporate from the room. Amira's hands began to tremble. So as it stands, you're not recognized as a legal heir. She laughed once, more in disbelief than humor. That's impossible. He raised me since I was 8. He called me his daughter every single day. He paid for my college. I'm not saying he didn't care for you, James said quickly. But legally, I can only go by what's on paper. Are you telling me that my father, the man who helped me practice for spelling bees, who drove 4 hours to see me when I was sick at college, who defended me every time someone in this town questioned why he had a Muslim daughter, just forgot to make it official? James hesitated, glancing at his watch. I'm sorry, but it happens more often than you'd think. His hesitation told her everything. Her cousins knew about this. Perhaps they had even orchestrated it. Amira stood, her grief giving way to something sharper. Thank you for the update, she said coldly, turning toward the door. Again, I'm truly sorry, he called after her. She didn't respond as she stepped back into the hallway. Something shifted inside her, grief taking a back seat as suspicion grabbed the wheel. She couldn't shake the feeling that James wasn't telling her everything, and that something about this will didn't add up at all. By the time she reached her car, a plan was already forming in her mind. Chapter 3. The house felt unfamiliar when Amira returned. Her cousin Nathan was already staying there, acting like he owned the place. Heard you talk to James, he said, barely looking up from his phone. Tough break. You knew, Amira said, not a question. Nathan shrugged. Said Uncle Frank never filed the final paperwork. That's a lie. He showed me the adoption certificate. It used to hang right there. She pointed to a freshly patched wall by the hallway mirror. Nathan looked over lazily. That thing, that was just for show. You're scared I'll find something, Amira said, her voice rising. You think just because he loved you, that means you get something? That's not how this works. Blood talks. Frank never cared about blood, Amira snapped. He chose me. Nobody in this town is going to side with you over us anyway, Nathan muttered. The implication hung in the air. Because she was Muslim. Because despite 15 years in Marion, she was still considered an outsider. Upstairs, her bedroom had been converted to storage, but her cedar chest remained. Inside, she found her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, with Frank's inscription, "To my daughter, forever, Dad." Between its pages was an envelope containing a letter. "To Amira, if I ever forget to say it out loud, you are my daughter, always. I may not have given you life, but loving you has been the most natural thing I've ever done. Love, Dad." Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from 2 days before Frank died. "If anything happens, check my desk at the university. There's a key taped underneath the bottom drawer. You'll know what it's for. Love you." The next day at Marion State University, Amira found the key, small, worn, marked with the name of a local bank. At First National, she discovered a safe deposit box containing her adoption finalization papers from 2009, a letter explaining Frank's suspicions about James, and a revised will naming her the primary beneficiary. She sat back, buzzing with determination. They had lied to erase her, but now she had proof, legal, personal, undeniable. As she left, the bank manager smiled kindly. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Amira nodded. "Everything's finally clear." But clarity was only the beginning. Now it was time for justice. Chapter 4. Amira walked into James Bartlett's office without an appointment, folder pressed to her chest. The receptionist tried to stop her, but Amira was past caring about politeness. "You lied to me," she said, standing in his doorway. James looked up, startled. "Amira, this isn't how we—" She opened the folder and placed the documents on his desk one by one. The court-stamped adoption order, the updated will listing her as beneficiary, her name in ink, signed by Frank Wilson. "You said there was no finalized adoption, that I wasn't in the will." Her voice was steady, controlled. "You lied." James scanned the papers in silence, his professional smile slipping. "This is unexpected." "No. What's unexpected is you thinking I wouldn't look for the truth." She leaned forward. "Did you think I'd just cry and leave?" "I gave you the version I had access to," he said cautiously. "My father didn't just forget to give you these documents. You did this on purpose." Her eyes narrowed. "My cousins told me everything. You were helping them get everything by cutting me out." "That's not—" "I've already contacted the State Bar Association," she interrupted. "Unless you want your entire practice dragged into court, I suggest you step aside and do it fast." He looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time since Frank died. "You always were stubborn like him." "I'm wrong," she said. "I'm worse, because I remember everything. Every dinner, every school event, every time he stood up for me when this town whispered about why he'd adopt a Muslim girl. He didn't raise me for show. He was my dad, and I'm not letting anyone erase that." The next morning, Amira met with a new attorney, Diane Reynolds from Columbus. Within days, everything began unraveling, not for Amira, but for James and her cousins. The probate clerk confirmed the will was legitimate. The adoption paperwork had been finalized over a decade ago. And most damning, James had knowingly presented an invalid will as the official version. 2 weeks later, Amira sat across from James, Nathan, and Margaret in a conference room at the courthouse. Diane stood beside her. "We've reviewed all documentation," Diane began, her voice steady as stone. "There is no ambiguity. Ms. Amira Malik is the legal adopted daughter of the deceased and the rightful heir under the most recent valid will." "So she gets everything?" Margaret muttered. "She gets what Frank intended for her to have," Diane replied. "That includes the house, the savings account, and the life insurance benefits." "She wasn't even blood," Nathan said under his breath. Amira sat up straighter. "Your uncle raised me. That house. You visited once every couple years. I was there every day. I watched his health decline. I made sure his medications were filled. Where were you?" James finally spoke. "Frank never gave me this updated version of the will." "That's another lie," Diane said, sliding a document across the table. "You notarized the revised will 6 months before Frank's death. Your signature and stamp are right there." Silence fell. The truth settled on the room like dust after an explosion. "You'll also be reporting this to the State Bar," Diane added, handing James a form. "We're filing a formal complaint for malpractice." Amira stood slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You knew I was his daughter? You just didn't want me to matter." With that, she walked out, not feeling triumphant, but vindicated. The truth had done what she couldn't alone. It made them see her for who she always was. 3 months later, Amira stood before a group of high school students at the community center. The topic, identity and belonging. "Let me tell you about a man named Frank Wilson," she began. "He was a history professor who liked quiet mornings, Elvis, and drank his coffee with too much sugar." She told them what happened, how people had tried to erase her, how paperwork had been hidden, how she'd been told she didn't belong. But my father never treated me like a maybe, she said. He showed up every single day. And when I finally found the truth, it wasn't in what other people said. It was in what he left behind. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Did you forgive them? The ones who lied? Amira paused, then answered, I let go. That's not the same as forgiving, not exactly. Some things don't deserve to be excused, but I wasn't going to carry that weight. It didn't belong to me. She looked at these kids with their crossed arms and cautious eyes. You don't have to have the same blood, the same culture, or the same faith to be family, she said. And just because someone looks like you doesn't mean they see you. That evening, Amira walked through campus, past the building where her father had taught for decades. She paused at his memorial bench and placed a small stone on top, a tradition she'd started. Before heading home, she opened her laptop to finalize the details for the Frank Wilson Legacy Fund, scholarships for adopted children, particularly those facing cultural barriers or discrimination. Under the title, she added a quote, "You don't become family by proving it. You become family by living it." To anyone on the outside, it looked like Amira Malik had just inherited a house. But what she'd really reclaimed was a history that had tried to leave her behind, and a future she now got to shape on her own terms. Wow, what a story. And there is more coming. Don't forget to subscribe to not miss a new stories.